everyone. This is Aaron with TheCardGuyz, and welcome to A to Z, episode 11, featuring Kassai. And I am joined today by Pierre-Nicolas Perrin from Team Sigil. So, Pierre, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, I'm Pierre. Uh, I've had most of my results on Kassai, which I'll kind of summarize here, but I top 8 calling LA on Kassai, and also had a battle hardened top 8 on Kassai. Um, so I'm quite excited to discuss the inner workings of that hero.
So, I consider you an expert of many things. I know you've played lots of heroes and you test pretty much everything, but what about Kassai specifically drew you to her? You played her at Pro Tour LA, along with some of your teammates at the time, and I know you've had success in other events with her as well. So why Kassai?
Yeah, Kassai is an interesting hero. She initially, at least, back in Heaviators like pre-release season, a lot of people kind of saw her ability as an offensive and an aggressive tool. Again, her hero ability reads, if you've drawn a card this turn, your sorted cast costs 0 essentially, and then once per turn action, you get to banish 2 reds, 2 yellows, and threaten a gold on hit with your weapons. And so that initially to a lot of people read very as an offensive tool, to pressure the opponent, with the goal being, obviously a draw, and then when you draw, your sword are discounted, so it's basically a free card. But also a lot of people run cash in. But then they came out with that card, Raise an Army, and then you realize that Kassai is more of a control hero, where the threat of gold actually is a lot deeper than just a card draw. It's not just snatch. It's I'm gonna have an ally on my board, um, and that gold represents an ally in the future. So obviously these allies, depending on the meta, can be either very easy or very hard to take care of. Um, and so that's kind of what made me and my teammates at the time focus on Kassai a lot, because back in Heaviators meta, PTLA, all of that, um, she was one of the only heroes that could threaten that board state outside of Jomai, and that in itself made Kassai a very control-oriented hero, where her gold threat was actually had a lot of implied value. Um, there was at the time also there was Hatchet's Dory, where Hatchet's Dory was much more oriented towards, face-up value. Okay, my axe is going to get +1, uh you know so it's much more face-up value. The on hit is okay, maybe I threaten another axe hit. Sometimes you did actually, have a third axe hit, but Kasai had a lot of implied value. She made you block when you didn't want to, which makes you lose value on your own turn. And then obviously she has attack reaction, so she can still force through the on hit. So she can accumulate that implied value over a game, and that gold can be used to draw or to make those allies, which give you very, very strong end games.
So compared to the last two sets that we've had, Rosetta and Part the Mistveil, Kassai
Mhm.
came out in a set that was a lot more fair on face value. It was very physical based, a lot
Yeah.
of blocking and defending. There wasn't too many tricks going on with huge OTKs and unpreventable split damage via arcane and things like that. So the newer heroes, especially at their power level, end up kind of immediately being meta contenders, namely KO, who did very well and was played very widely. Victor did well in his own regard,
Mhm.
and Kassai is kind of in that same boat. So I would assume that you would consider Kassai a fair hero in terms of the overall, choices in the game.
Yeah, I think like she has a very fair uh value proposition, um where she threatens obviously a gold in places where you can really pressure your opponents, but that in itself is quite fair, I think, as a hero ability. Obviously, you can kind of abuse her other techs, which when you draw, your sword attacks cost one less, essentially free. But yeah, it's very fair. Her only kind of unfair thing is Raisin Army, which was one of the main win cons she had, and into a lot of heroes, they could not really handle that win condition as much. So that did give you kind of freer matchups. But all in all, she was more, physical damage. Um, she was playing towards a lot of the fundamentals of Fab. Yeah.
So let's say I'm a new player. I really like swords. I like the warrior aesthetic. I like the simplicity. I know you already touched on this a little bit when you mentioned Hatchet Dorinthia, but what differentiates Kassai from her other warrior kin? And if I wanted to play Kassai as a new player or a player of a different hero who just wanted to try her out, what advantages would I gain compared to her other warriors or in the meta as a fair deck?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing to look at when differentiating warriors, and I'm gonna exclude Bolden out of that because he plays on such a different axis. But I think um, to really differentiate, you need to look at specializations. And honestly, one of the biggest reasons why you would play Kassai over Dory, for example, is the threat of board state. Um, and notably, like when you're Dromai, you have Phantasm on your dragons, but those little Centauri Cell Swords, they don't have Phantasm. So some heroes like really struggle to get them out of the board, and oftentimes that's enough for you to accumulate enough value with those. And you have to think of those little guys as added life to you as well. Like if they want to take care of them, that's damage that's not going towards you, and it's also damage um that's going, you're keeping cards in hand, right? So you get to that. It's a very massive pressure pivot when you play Raise an Army, and I think if you want to play Kassai over Dory, that card should be number one. Is Raise an Army good in this meta?
Yeah,
Yeah.
one of Dorinthia's biggest weakness historically has been very defensive Guardian decks that have lots of D-reacts and are just able to stop a lot of what she's doing.
Yeah.
Guardian, one of their biggest weaknesses historically has been Illusionist, that's just been able to flood the board and take advantage of their lack of action economy. So having a warrior that can kind of, play as a illusionist, I could see, shores up a lot of weaknesses that the other warriors don't have. So
Yeah.
we talked about the advantages of Kassai, and that's all great. I'm a new Kassai player. I love swords and warriors. I'm really hyped to play Kassai, but I also like to temper expectations a little bit. So, I'm a very practical person. I don't want to just grab a hero and act like I'm going to win every round and go to my armory in 0-3. So temper my expectations a little bit. What is Kassai lacking overall, and what is she missing, if anything? She could just be
Yeah.
broken.
She's definitely not broken currently. I think.
Spoiler.
Yeah, I think she was very good and underrated before Miss Vel. A lot of people put her in B tier, but I don't think they quite understood the implied value of how much implied value you get out of that hero when you play her very well. So I think she was A tier or like on the cusp of AS in that meta. When Miss Vel came out, obviously Zen kind of broke the format, and Kassai was not able to really interact with him. She has very good 2-3 card hands, and yes, she can recycle Dynamo every turn, right? Like that's a big advantage of playing Kassai is you get to play Raze and Dynamo. But the issue is that Zen oftentimes just had a massive burst damage turn, and so you can't really juice out as much value as from Dynamo as you normally could. And then obviously the biggest threat to her, which obviously now Zen kind of dead, right? But Enigma's still very much alive. And Enigma is like a brick wall that you almost never get through. I mean, I've tried to play into Enigma, obviously, a month or so back when we tested for Amsterdam, and it was just not working. I was playing shunts. I was playing a lot of those tools that kind of should help warrior, and you don't get more than 20% win rate. Into illusionist as overall, you also have to look into prism. I think actually you do have chances into prism, specifically with shuns that can give you advantage on her dragons. Prism doesn't. It's not dragons, angels, and you get to get kind of the snipe with that shun that you can't really into Enigma. Um, so it's interesting. I think she has play into Prism, especially now that her tome is dead, right? You get to kind of pressure her more fairly, and Prism can't just like, oops, tome triple aura and an ALS pass, and then okay, cool, I guess I lose. She doesn't have that anymore, but you still have to manage her arrow down the hits, etc. So overall, Kassai plays on a very defensive to mid-range axis. Anything that kind of mid-range, you know, gets weak against, she's going to be weak against. Kassai can generate action points. You know, she has 2 sword swings, but she can't really generate much more than that. So Spectra is very good generally into her. But yeah, I think she needs a little bit of anti-ward, like something that helps her get through that prevention, and not let Enigma kind of rest on her feet and like, okay, cool, I guess I'll protect board state. Oh, oops, you have your react. Oh, like this winning vengeance covers it, right? Like you don't have you need a little bit more counterplay towards that. But the
Yeah.
rest of the meta, I think you're actually quite fine right now. Into mechs, you can completely fatigue them. Um, into obviously Zen is super nerfed. And brutes, you have very good play patterns against. Historically, Kassai has always been very good into brutes. Um, Maybe less Levia, but still favored. It is. I think right now, like if you weren't so weak against Enigma, you'd be actually quite in a good place as Kassai.
Yeah, Enigma or Illusionist in general definitely has a reputation of gatekeeping a lot of different types of heroes, and it seems that Warrior is, fallen into that pool of heroes that struggle against that type of game plan. So
Yeah.
I could definitely understand that. One more thing to talk about before we get into the deck tech itself and the card choices that you've picked. Obviously, recently LSS has announced a pretty big ban and restricted that Kassai, unfortunately, even though in her not quite, of the highest rankings in the meta, did catch a stray on due to their redesigned philosophy in the form of Cash In. This is a card that was seen play in a lot of Kassai lists. It was kind of the opposite, game plan of the Raisin Army package. It kind of accelerated you. A lot of people were playing, the Royal Headpiece just to facilitate this card. So tell me a little bit about what the banning of this card does to Kassai.
Yeah. So I mean, if you've seen my deck lists in the past on Kassai, I've never registered cash in at a tier 3+ event.
Mm-hmm.
I think Raisin Army has historically always been better outside of MST. Like the whole kind of MST season, you had to kind of run cash in, unfortunately, because you were in that spot where you needed a little bit of gas against Enigma. But cash in has always been kind of anti-synergistic with how I think Kassai should be played, in that it's a very quite controlly hero that grinds value over time. Uses that implied value at very specific pressure spots. Threatening her gold is very meaningful. and some heroes can't block that well, so they have to lose value when blocking you. And Cash-In is kind of anti-synergistic with this. The card also feels kind of clunky at times, but you had to have at least 2 in sideboard to kind of get through Enigma, even have a sliver of a chance before Unsheathed. And so, yeah, I think it is a bit unfortunate. Obviously, now you're losing a bit of points into Enigma. But notably, LSS has said that, I think in the ban announcement, they said that they're aware that Warrior is weak. It has polarized matchups. So maybe they'll come with some spice. But yeah, I think Cash-In was never the way I loved playing Kassai. I don't think it was the correct way. But it was a tool she had access to get a little bit of acceleration in some turns.
Well, it's
Yeah,
good to hear your opinion on that, actually, because I know a lot of Kassai players were really dooming about it, thinking that it was kind of a nail in the coffin for the hero, that it was some kind of required staple to make the deck function at a core level, but sounds like it was just a tool in the arsenal in specific metas. Unfortunately, that specific meta just kind of happens to be what we're in right now, so
yeah.
overall it is still a net negative, but it's not something that Kassai is going to take a long time to snap back out of, because it's not pivotal to her identity.
Well, I think a lot of players, they play Kassai, and I mean, a lot of her cards are 0 for 3s, 0 for 3 offensively, 0 for 3 defensively, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And they realize, okay, card draw is good because of her text, and so it must be, and she makes gold, so Cash-In must be good, right? Um, and a lot of players were playing it kind of Ooga Boonga, like face up value. Okay, cool. Like I'm gonna play out all my 0 for 3, 0 for 4s, and like get value that way. But she has a much more. I think her play pattern is actually much deeper than that, and you make very significant decisions when you threaten a gold, or even get a gold. Raise an army, just the threat of that card is crazy, and so I think she actually will not miss Cash-In. I think players will have to adapt for sure. Um, but obviously, I'm always available for to on Discord. You can ask me questions or whatever. But I do think she will be fine.
It's definitely a little bit less fun now that you can't draw a million cards.
Are you sure? Yeah, drawing cards funny. Yeah. Oops, funny card.
All right. So getting into the deck itself, one of the first things I notice, when I look at any deck, but in general here, is I like to look at these pretty colors up here. So we see that there's quite a bit of red cards in this deck, which usually tells you that the cost curve is pretty low. You're having a lot of cheap cards in your deck. You don't need quite as many heavy resource cards. Obviously, it makes sense with Kassai's hero ability, where it says red and yellow on the card text. Usually, that's a good indicator that you should put red and yellow cards in your deck. But I noticed that the blue count is higher than the yellow count. Now,
Yeah.
what is it about Kassai's cost curve and how she wants to play out her turns that need this number of blue cards? Why can't I just fill my deck full of reds and yellows and just go crazy?
Yeah. So I mean, her play pattern is quite simple, right? Oftentimes, all you want to do on your turn is sword, give a go against sword. And often, if you end up playing an unsheathed or something, then okay, it's cause you go again cost 0, but then the extra resource can be put into your gloves or into your chess piece. So there's ways you can do that, but you always, like, my theory on Kasai is that you always need a blue in your hand. Like, that is the best way you can maximize value of, like, on your turn, and not ever break on resources. You don't ever want to pitch 2 cards to do your classic turn of sword go against sword, right? Like that's just terrible math. You would almost always want to block with one of those cards, or use it offensively, or arsenal it. So in my opinion, you should always have a blue every turn, every single turn of the game. And if you're one of the cool things about Kassai is that her chess piece makes vigor tokens, and so you get to roll over some of that resource if you don't use it. And so you can kind of go, not up to 20, 21 blues, but kind of lower, because you get to kind of hedge towards those turns where you don't have that full that blue, where you have a yellow, maybe you have to pitch, and so that vigor kind of translates into a full blue. Or if you need to roll over that vigor to be a courage token with your verses. Um, so kind of resource wise, she always wants that blue. And then I think there's different theories between players where her yellow count should be quite high, maybe almost equivalent to her reds. But a lot of her power cards are reds. And you still want to be on or above rate, right? There's no there's no two ways about it. You still need good math to win games. And so if you have 17 or 20 blues and then you have 20 reds, 20 yellows, like that, you have a big gap in value um, between the reds and yellows over a full game. So that's why also knowing when to threaten your own hit matters, because with only 15 yellows, you only get to reasonably send 6 or 7 threats of gold, right?
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, Flesh and Blood 101, attack with your reds, pitch your blues, right? That's true for even
Exactly.
yellow heroes, I guess.
She's a fundamentals hero. I think
Yeah.
if you want to work on your fundamentals of Fab, she's a very good hero to start with or continue your journey with.
All right, so let's talk about the equipment. So every hero needs to dress up before they go into battle. It's one of your most important parts of the deck in your game. We'll start with the weapons. You are playing a Centauri Saber and a Hot Streak. For the most part, this is fairly standard. I think other than one Battle Hardened I saw where there was like a Hatchet Kassai that won, I think most people kind of understand that, hey, swords were kind of designed for this hero's kit, and they work pretty well. I have seen, some Kassai players opting for a second copy of Centauri Sabers over the Hot Streak. So since Centauri Saber is kind of the obvious inclusion, let's talk a little bit about Hot Streak and what this card does and why is it better than just having a second Centauri Saber.
Yeah, so I caught a lot of flack, or I guess like polarized the community a little bit when I top-aided Battle Hartford with Kassai. I think it was the first weekend when this set released, and when people saw my list, it was running Raisin Army and Hot Streak. I got so many messages saying like, "What the heck are you doing?" Like, people were saying this list couldn't have possibly top aided, and like it was all like player skill and stuff. But there's a simple explanation to this, and it's just implied value. Like the text on Hot Streak basically reads like, if your opponent respects your own hit, then you get go again. And so there's a lot of matchups that end up towards fatigue, or kind of grindy situations with a few cards left in deck, where just keeping an extra card, not using your go again, matters a ton. Um, Examples being against Guardian, where Guardian can't reasonably block your weapons with reacts the entire game. And so not using a full card to give go again to Hot Streak is massive, right? A good player, a good Guardian player would understand that. And so you give them this value proposition that they either lose out on the gold on hit, or they lose out on letting you have not use your go again card that you can roll over for next turn or pitch stack, whatever. So it's just there's a there's obviously a few slight differences in with Centauri Saber. Centauri Saber reads, if you block with an attack action, it gets +1 until end of turn, and obviously Blood on her hands, um, it makes that better. So you lose out on that strong turn, but mathematically, I ended up finding out that running double saber doesn't really give you more value. If they respect your react, they're going to overblock anyways, and so you're +1, unless you eke out with a +3 and they only block like 5, or you don't quite often get that extra value from the second saber. in your play patterns.
Is there a difference in the order of which you swing these two weapons, depending on maybe what type of
Yeah.
reactions or go again that you have in your hand?
Yeah, I mean, there's different plays that you can do. The most like classic turn, right, is like you have two cards in hand, and you swing Hot Streak, and they don't block it, so you give it go again, and then you swing Centauri Saber, right, and that's your two-card hand. The kind of, if they block your Hot Streak, obviously you just converted your blue to 2/2, and even possibly like a Vigor or something. But overall, it's not a out of the realm of possibilities to start with a Saber, give it go again, and then Hot Streak, kind of saying, okay, like if you block my Hot Streak, maybe I send a Nourishing after, right? Sometimes you have enough resources to do that. It's mostly to do that extender at the end. So it's things like CNC, Nourishing, Emptiness. It used to be uh, a big play when you were able to do that, and oftentimes that happens after they kind of let you have those 4 cards. So one of the biggest things about Kassai is you have to build her to kind of tolerate many ranges of hands. Some heroes will want to set up into you and kind of spike damage on turns, and so you have to be able to make use of those 4 cards in your hand when they leave them to you. And so being able to kind of threaten that and say, okay, are you gonna block Hot Streak here? And maybe I have nothing, but maybe I have a Nourishing after this, right? And so that especially coupled with a gold on hit, that is a very difficult proposition for the opponent.
Right. So the more possibilities you give your opponent to ponder, the more likely they are to make a mistake into your play, right?
Exactly. And it's just a classic warrior thing, right? Like you want to make your opponent not as easily read you, but you also want to read your opponent at the same time and see like their tendencies. Do they end up blocking Hot Streak often? Do they never block Hot Streak? You always want to gain value uh, from their blocks, and so it's kind of interesting to try to game that and make them kind of block unnecessarily, uh, or things like that. So there's a lot of that psychology that I kind of like about Warrior. Um, yeah, there's just a lot of different things that you can do with that implied value that scare your opponent or let them blunder into you.
Yep, that is definitely classic warrior. I'm sure we'll talk about the weapons again as we go over some of the main deck cards, but we'll quickly run through the rest of the equipment. Crown of Providence, this is a pretty obvious one. I don't think anyone would ever question why you would play Crown of Providence. It's just a solid card and pretty much any hero who wants to play it. Although this is the only headpiece you're playing. So some of the other options, that people have played in the past have been Balance of Justice. I know that card's relevance has gone down a little bit with the recent bannings of all of the cards that would turn it on. But Brute still draws multiple cards. Do you feel like that card is not necessary anymore?
I mean, I think you could have Balance feasibly. I don't have it in this list because you could potentially do without it. It depends on how much, Brute there is in the meta. I expect to see some, but it's so early. We're recording this like early September, so it's kind of by this point we have
Wild West,
we
we don't
still
know.
Yeah, it's the Wild West, right?
But
So
Brute's
you
been
can
a good
feasibly have
matchup for you.
Balance.
Brute's
Yeah,
been like a
exactly.
good matchup for Kassai normally, right?
Yeah, Brew has been pretty good for Kassai, and so I'm testing kind of what it feels like to not even have Balance. They're obviously like Ninja's not drawing 2 anymore. Like they don't have Art of War. You can kind of like there was some people that were doing Balance into Kano and like of hopefully cheese like their tome draw.
Well,
Like
heck,
obviously
can't
that's
do that
not even
anymore.
yeah, you can't do that anymore.
I mean, it's probably better than Crown of Providence than the Kano.
Yeah. Well, reading is banned, so all
We
those
don't like
decks
that.
that drew 2 in the past, they can't really anymore. And so you're happy about that? That I guess that gives you a free slot, and Crown of Providence currently feels like the best headpiece. Obviously, Crown of Dominion was always a thing. I see you have it pulled up, yeah. Uh, I really liked it back in the like more like very focused on control when Kassai was very focused on control and having that starting gold. That could matter a lot. But now your games can be so grindy. I think the meta slowed down enough where like you don't have to start with a gold. Actually, I think starting without a gold gives you some more agency throughout the game because uh, it's kind of weird, right? But if you don't start with a gold, then the opponent cares more about your first gold, and so
Right.
uh, uh, they will more easily blunder. But it's very possible that it's still a Crown of Dominion meta. The meta is quite slow, and so starting with that gold, if people start to block a lot, I think Crown of Dominion easily can make it.
Yeah, a lot of people associate this card specifically with cash in, but Kassai actually had a lot of other uses for the gold outside of cash in. You said yourself you didn't really register cash in, but were you playing Crown of Dominion in any of those lists that you played at tournaments? Some people play it
Yeah,
for, raise an army or just the general value of having a gold, making your swords free.
yeah, I was playing it in LA and I think maybe in Hartford, but in LA for sure. Um, it was just the main tool against decks like Warrior Mirror, Guardian, etc., where you really wanted to have as much gold as possible. The Warrior Mirror is interesting. It's actually one of my favorites. Well, like back in Heavy Hitters Day, obviously. Um, it was one of my favorite matchups because you really had to set up a very good second cycle with Raisin Army, accumulate as much gold over time. And since it's a mid-range versus mid-range matchup, uh, whoever was able to gain as value throughout the game, it generally won. And so starting with an extra gold, when you see cash in, not cash in, Raisin Army.
Yeah.
When you see Raisin Army, you know that you're at least getting one dude, one of the Centauri sellsword, and so that mattered a lot. So I think in those slower metas, it's very possible. We'll see how slow the meta or how fast the meta is now. But it's very possible include for
But
sure.
yeah, definitely something not to forget about.
Yeah.
So for the chess piece, you have two. You have Grains of Blood Spill, and you have Fiendel's Spring Tunic. Tunic's a pretty obvious one. A lot of people play that card. Grains is a very powerful warrior card. Like you were mentioning about the Vigor tokens, it's a way to use excess resources that you might not have needed to use for one reason or another. Perhaps someone overblocked your sword and you don't need to play the reaction that you had, and you just have an extra floating resource. Actually, that wouldn't work because Grains has to hit. But whatever the reason, you can turn excess resources into Vigor tokens. So this has been a pretty popular warrior staple as well. So when do you play Grains of Blood Spill, and when do you bring in the Tunic, and why?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. To be honest, I'm not fully quite sure when, for old matchups, which ones I really want Tunic to be in. Um, One of the advantages of having the combo with Versus and Blood Spill is that there's always implied value on board. Like, if my if my swords hits, like I get to roll out value in the next turn, and then with the Versus, you get to always threaten something. I mean, if not a gold, it's a courage could matter in the next turn. So, or you next thing, like you could have nourishing for 7 dominate or something like that, right? Like there's these kinds of patterns that uh, your equipment on board is always representing something, and so that matters a ton. Tunic though is more so for like the more insidious matchups like Enigma, where you really like the whole play pattern really is like use Tunic to play your shunts. Like you really want to have good shunt turns, and so and kind of end her turn like this and regulate her board state a little bit. And so Tunic is mainly for that. Obviously, that rolls over to new. Yeah, I think New is a very good matchup for Kassai and Warrior historically because she can't really use your blues that well. And so being able to use Tunic Shunt in addition to you having a good matchup, you always want to kind of, or at least that's my theory, you always want to kind of secure your good matchups. And so whenever you're looking for tech outs, to solve your bad matchups, ideally you want to also use that tech to secure your good ones. And so having crossover like this is very strong in my opinion. And so it's always something to look for. And Tunic Shunts helps with both those MST matchups.
So Tunic and Shunt kind of go hand in hand. You probably wouldn't play the Steelblade Shunts without the Tunic, just I assume.
It's a little awkward. Obviously, like if things are going really poorly, and like you can't really, you're kind of stuck in that position of being completely submerged by Enigma. Or even, if Enigma has only one word and you have the shunt on your hand, like it's very possible you just pitch to play your shunt and now like her ward is gone. So there's obviously there's times when you don't necessarily want to always line it up with Tunic up, but most of the time, just in terms of card efficiency and play patterns, you want to kind of line up your Tunic counter with it.
Makes sense. All right, next we got Iron Song versus Armor's Good. Why this one over the other warrior, the Brave Forge Bracers?
Yeah, for the longest time, I was a big Brave Forge Bracers fan. Actually, in LA, I think I registered it. It's interesting. I think there's a good argument for both. Number one, Brave Forge Racers has Battle Worn, so into stuff like mech, you actually get to kind of abuse that with their armor hate. Versus though, I've found feels a little better, just because you get to always have a resource sink whenever you need. And on the 2-card hand, like you can do Iron Song versus and then Hot Streak, and then even if you don't have a go again, if you were just left with a blue, you get to kind of threaten, hey, like if you let this Hot Streak hit, then I just got a value that rolls over next turn. And then the last resource you get to put it in grains. And so you just convert your blue to basically 4 value. Or else I guess you can block my hot streak and I'm okay with taking a card and I'm swinging my next card, right? And so it kind of gets that value and threatens those 2 or 1 card hands a little better when you're forced to. And it's the same principle that I've been reiterating, right? It's the implied value. Like I don't think people quite value the importance of presenting on hits. Sometimes presenting an on hit matters more than the actual on hit, and people get scared at on hits. So it's always valuable to have that, and especially on an equipment, I think it's very strong.
Yeah, it definitely forces your opponent into some awkward spots, especially when you combine the different on hits that Kassai has available. Like you said, if you activate Iron Song versus and then attack with Hot Streak, well, now they have to decide if they don't block, you're going to get a free courage token. If you do, you get go again. So,
and like
what is worse for them?
And they can always block with a non-attack, or they can always block with a reaction. But then you have to kind of realize, like, a lot of heroes, their reactions or their non-attacks is some of their power cards. And so them giving that to, them giving those types of cards to you, I'm very okay with. For, I just traded a blue for one of your strong cards that you were about to play on your turn. Like this is the kind of implied value I'm talking about. It's not face up value, like Dory has. It's more so like making your opponent uncomfortable and make those hard decisions that they will eventually take the wrong one, right?
For sure. And then lastly, the boots. Pretty obvious, Valiant Dynamo. This card is very strong. Go ahead and explain why it's so strong.
Yeah, it's very strong. Like Aaron said, it's look. You swing 2 swords like every turn. You get to just recycle that Valiant Dynamo every turn. Obviously, I mean some turns you don't. But you always have to look at Valiant Dynamo's value, like in your turn cycle value. Like if you just have a 2-card 7 with weapon, go again, +3 weapon, like that's 7 value, face up, and Valiant Dynamo adds to it. It's 8 value because you get to block with Valiant Dynamo next turn, and then next turn you'll do it again. And so that's a value that's added to your relatively on rate turns. And at the end of the day, you know, that's face up value. And so if you're already on rate face up and then you're threatening things at the same time, you start to accumulate value, implied or face up, that some opponents cannot deal with. And Valiant Dynamo being a 1 block, sometimes block value matters way more than damage. And so being able to cover nasty breakpoint or things like that is invaluable. Sometimes the Valiant Dynamo can be worth much more than 1.
Absolutely. Armor is good, and
Yep.
having an armor that constantly refreshes itself just gives you a lot of flexibility. Absolutely. So getting into the cards now, we'll go through some of these cards and see how strong and what their purpose is individually, but also how do they kind of coincide with Kassai's game plan in general. Obviously, as a deck that you are trying to swing your weapons constantly, you're not really playing attack actions like a lot of other heroes are. So I guess the first thing I do want to discuss is the one attack action you are playing, which is Nourishing Emptiness. This is a card that has seen play in the past for other heroes that don't really play attack actions, or in Kassai's case, you don't really play attack actions, but you also have ways to kind of cheese the interaction a little bit. So go ahead and talk a little bit about Nourishing Emptiness and why is this card good enough that you don't feel the need to play other attack actions?
Yeah, so I've played both Nourishing or CNC or both in my lists. I think currently CNC is fine, but there's a lot of armor in the format, and in general, CNC is having diminishing returns on 2-card hands. And so, yes, it's very strong, and CNC kind of synergizes with that courage token that you sometimes get. So yeah, I think it's always a worthy include, but Nourishing is just very, very, very good. Since you don't play a lot of attack actions by default, you get to always have Nourishing on, at least for the first one. And then, if you go back to Kassai's text, whenever you threaten a gold, you actually have to banish 2 reds and 2 yellows from your graveyard. And so, oh, wow, cool. I use my first Nourishing. I draw my second one. I'm going to Arsenalate, and then next turn I'm going to threaten a gold, if it makes sense, right? And so when you threaten a gold, you're banishing your first Nourishing, and so now you don't have any attack actions in your graveyard, and so now your second Nourishing is online. And so you get to kind of go through that play cycle of like threat. It's additional threat. The point of Nourishing is, and it was for CNC as well, for what it's worth. It's armor hate. You don't really play Nourishing because you want to draw 5 cards. Like, sure, I'm cool with drawing 5 cards. Like, that's fine. But I want to nuke your armor because I want my goal to go through, or I want to nuke your armor because that's the only thing that prevents you from getting hit by these nasty breakpoints, right? And so having those cards that are armor hate matters a ton. And obviously, you're never unhappy drawing 5 cards. This list can convert that pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you mentioned CNC, and one thing that someone might notice with a deck that's only playing Nourishing Emptiness as attack actions, and Warrior in general who doesn't play attack actions, is you don't really have a lot of Phantasm poppers. Now, I know in the past Kassai has played larger amounts of those. Is that just because the meta right now, you don't really expect to see too many of those types of cards?
Yeah, I think so. There's the Prism problem still. Like, I do think, like, at the end of the day, like, this list is quite early in the new meta, but if Prism shows up and is impressive more than we expect, then you can definitely add more poppers. But into Enigma, you don't really play poppers anymore. Like, she punishes you for popping her things, like Merging Metamorph. Uh, like she punishes you by doubling an aura, and the aura is what you really hate against her. So most of the time, like if you want to block, you're not blocking with a popper. And then sure, there's Phantasmaclasm, but like okay, that she doesn't even really run that anymore. Some do, but not anymore. So it's
Sure.
kind of it's meta specific. Like if Prism does become a bit stronger, you can definitely add more, maybe 6 poppers. But at the end of the day, even during the Dromai meta, I was not even running uh more than 6 or 7 poppers into Prism. Like I think my LA list had something like 12 poppers, like something absurd. Like I dedicated a lot of my sideboard to to Dromai, and my whole game plan to Dromai was beat the bad ones, and it
Yeah.
ended up working out.
Yeah, that was definitely
Uh,
one of your most problematic matchups for sure.
yeah, and Dromai
So,
was bad, and so a lot of
yeah.
Dromais kind of didn't do their homework on Kassai, and I was able to very much tempo into them by, okay, cool, I'm using one card of my hand every turn, and that stops your entire turn, and you are taking damage every single time because that like I don't think this beats very good Dromai, but it does get you to a good spot in the calling, right? So if you beat most of the bad ones, you're fine. So you don't run nearly as many poppers. Like the popper tech into a Dromai was never a long-term thing. But into Prism, like you block very well. You cover breakpoints very well. You have a lot of armor. Everything in your deck blocks 3. You have 3 poppers currently. Could go up to 6. Like you don't need that much space to make Prism hurt. And even now that she's not as aura focused. You get to really delay her go off turns by blocking well. And I don't think you need as many poppers to be determined, but we'll see if she even is a real deck.
Playing attack actions for the purpose of Phantasm will always be dictated by how much Phantasm is in the meta. So makes
Exactly,
sense.
exactly.
This is a good benchmark to see, like, hey, if Phantasm is at its lowest right now, then out of all the attack actions that you would play, Nourishing Emptiness stands above the rest to still be worth including.
Yeah.
So let's get into the meat of the deck. You have your sword pumps and reactions. We'll start with Blade Flurry. I think about 10 seconds after this card was spoiled, when everyone had time to read it, everyone's opinion was already formed that, hey, this card is really good.
Yeah.
Anyone who has had any kind of experience with Warrior just kind of understands that the inherent value of this card is just strong. It's a 3-block. It deals 4 damage. It doesn't cost anything. Why is Blade Flurry so good? And for a lot of these reactions, I'd like to talk about breakpoints and what tricks that they have over their counterparts in terms of threatening those on hits in certain scenarios. So as Blade
Yeah.
Flurry is a reaction that, works on both swords, unlike a lot of other ones, how is that beneficial, and why is this card so strong other than it just being seemingly overrate?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's overrate and like, okay, cool, it says 0 for 4. But there's 2 heroes that kind of play this very well. There's Dory and then Kassai. Dory plays it slightly weird because she has 2 guaranteed value, but then the second 2 value is only if her Dawnblade hits. Uh, and then obviously Axis Dory plays it kind of the same as Kassai. But Kassai it's always guaranteed 4 value, right? So that's the baseline. It's a 0 for 4. So it's already quite strong. And then with Kassai specifically, you have so many on hits that kind of annoy your opponent, and your swords are always based to attack. So what ends up happening is that even if you weren't buffing any of your weapons, you get to and let's say like you have an agility or something, like you can convert just a blue and Blade Flurry to like 4 into 4, and then you have one floating you can do whatever with, right? And so just the fact that from base being 2 plus 2 being 4 from Blade Flurry, you're presenting at least 2 breakpoints per that turn, right? And so that obviously most cards block 3, so presenting 4 into 4 is very strong. Now you pair this with a Blade Runner, now you're presenting 4 into 7 or 4 into 6 or something. And obviously the 6 being on the Centauri Saber, so it's technically 4 really. So you when you're threatening, and that's what I mean by implied value, is like when you're threatening your own hits, it's never easy to block what you're sending. And it's a reaction, right? So it's always kind of strange and weird to read into what the Kassai is about to do. So you're actually gaining implied value by making them block weirdly. That's always the classic warrior thing, and Blade Flurry is one of those tools that diversifies your arsenal. Most of your reactions are 0 for 3s, so it's very easy when you're playing against Dory to say, "Oh, cool! Like most of her reactions are going to be 0 for 3s or 1 for 3s. I just need to block like 3 or 4 over, and then I know I'm kind of like in a good spot, right?" But with Blade Flurry in Kassai, like that value is separated between two swords, like guaranteed. Your second one's not conditional, like Dory. So it's always it gives you another tool to trick your opponent and make your opponent misread you.
Yeah, this one's always been super annoying for me whenever I played against Kassai. You know, you play against Warrior enough, you can kind of get a gauge for what tricks they might have, you know, here and there. And you think about, oh, I want to play around this reaction by blocking this way. But Blade Flurry was always the one to me that was like, there's no way to really accurately predict if they have it, and there's not a good hedge block to play around it, you know, and deny the value. So Blade Flurry was always the one to me. It's like, if they have it, they have it. You can't really afford to play around it when you're playing against Kassai, which, you know, just speaks for how good the card is right there.
Yeah, when a card doesn't have a lot of easy interactions, generally it's a good card.
For sure. Next up, we got Blade Runner. You're running all 9 copies of this card, very similarly to the core of the Hatchet Dory deck that did very well. What is it about this card that just acts as the bread and butter of two-handed warriors in all colors like this?
Yeah, in Kassai, it's really the chord pool, right? At the end of the day, you need go again on your first sword, or like your whole like philosophy doesn't work. So you want to maximize as much as that. I don't think there's. I was talking to my teammate Shamir, and I was like kind of discussing with him, hey, like, is there too much go again? Like with the 3 on cheat, then we kind of went to the conclusion that you can't really have too much go again, especially when somewhere in your blue base. So you can always maximize on go agains and be fine. But it's kind of it just goes in a bread and butter play of sword go again buff sword, right? And it's a 2-card hand, 7/8 value, and you're very happy. So obviously it kind of fits in that. Blade Runner costs 1 and it's a reaction. Obviously, like when you're playing Kassai and you're sending a sword, like, yes, it's a reaction, but everybody knows you're gonna go again, right? The only kind of weird thing about it is, okay, is it maybe glint that 1 out of 9 times, right? Like, I don't know the actual stats. It's probably 1 out of 4 or something. But glint is very strong. And so you do get to kind of mix Blade Runner and Glint the Quicksilver, which has a reprise effect of drawing a card. So it's essentially a free go again. So you kind of get to act on that reaction aspect, but most of the time you're just happy to and to have go again, and you're living your best life.
For sure. We also have In the Swing, another pretty simple face-up reaction, 0 cost +3. Very similar to, you know, one of the old staples, Iron Song Response. However, this is, you know, you have this, but it's in the sideboard, whereas In the Swing you have the main board. I assume that's probably due to the unconditional nature of this. You don't rely on your opponent to turn it on, but why this card even though it does have a certain, restriction to it.
Yeah, so notably, I think the main board in this list is 56 or something like this. So oftentimes, like your packages are gonna be in. Obviously, you can remove main board, but it's gonna be in packages of 4 or 5, and I just think in the swing is the one of your better 0 for 3 reacts. Obviously, it's the level of conditionality to it. You have 0 for 3 always on your second swing. Then you have uh, 0 for 3 only if they block, and then you have 1 for 3 in uh, in one of your
What, like stroke?
yeah, stroke. Sorry, forgot the the name of the card. Yeah, in your stroke, and
There's lots of
so
1 for 3 reactions. Just take your pick.
yeah, yeah, exactly. But I mean, obviously, this one's slightly better because you get to draw if they reprise.
Yeah.
Like 1 for 3 is kind of a weird like play pattern. Like it doesn't really fit in all of your cost curves. So it's kind of like that breakdown of okay, in the swing, very good, and then depending on the matchup, maybe it's stroke or it's uh or it's another react or it's both or something like that, right? So it depends, but in the swing is just good into everything. It doesn't have really a big condition to achieve.
So what are the big differences between 0 cost and 1 cost attack reactions when, trying to dissect what your
Yeah,
hand is capable of and what you can do off of whatever resource card you have available?
yeah. So in general, your turn, like we said, it costs 3, right? So you have 1 cost sword, and then 1 cost being your blade runner or your run through to give go again and buff your next sword, and then your third resource goes into your last sword. So all that costs 3 resources, 1 blue. Oftentimes, what you can end up doing is okay, like you have unsheathed or you have glint the quicksilver, and now your go again is free, and or cost 0, and so you get to use that resource into your gloves or into blood spill your chest, giving you vigor. And so sometimes you have turns that have 4 kind of available resources. Sometimes you have less if you don't draw a blue. But in general, you always kind of there's always this mini game of like maybe you're rolling over vigor until you need it, and that's always very good, right? You're just increasing your consistency over a game, and so you always have to think of your turn being 3 cost because that's just how like you're supposed to build the deck, right? Like most of your go against 1 cost. Even when you draw, like you pop a blue into a gold and draw, like yes, your weapons are you're gaining you're technically not losing resources because your weapons are lowered, but then you still have that 1 resource left over that could be that should be used on your go again, and so you want a lot of your things to be 0 cost, like your pumps, um, your pre-pumps like slice and dice or uh, uh yeah, unsheathed cost 0, or your reacts like in the swing cost 0. Like a lot of your kind of pumps cost 0. Um, so that's like the baseline is you want your things to cost 0 if it doesn't give go again. The flip side of this is if you can go to stroke. Uh, the stroke reads slightly differently, where you can give +3 and then costing 1. So the play pattern is okay, I'm gonna swing my sword, and then I'm gonna give it go again, and then oh wow, you defended, cool. I'll stroke, give it +3, and now I'm drawing, right? Because it says if reprise, you get to draw a card and put a card, and so it works with your Kassai ability, and so your next weapon costs 0, and so you actually your turn kind of costed 3 still, right? And you got a pump in there.
Yeah, so the stroke of
So
foresight is basically acting as a pseudo 0 cost if the reprise triggers.
yeah,
That's kind of
yeah.
cool.
And it's actually slightly better in my opinion, than Iron Song Response, because Response it only gives +3 if it's blocked, right? So you always get that little juicer at the end. Like if they're expecting Iron Song Response and they don't block, and then you give +3 still because of stroke, like very very good, right? So it's not conditional +3. So yeah, I mean, you'll see like play a little bit with the hands in the deck, and you kind of see why like everything's kind of concentrated towards that 3 cost turn every single turn. And if you ever have a like Unsheath is a very very good starter for that like vigor mini game with your chest with blood spill, because you get to unsheathed weapon and you have one floating, and that floating is almost always going to go in your chest. And so now you have that vigor that kind of rolls over the entire game until you don't draw your blue. Oh cool, like I finally like used my vigor, and my consistency through the roof. And then the opponent can choose to stop your kind of vigor mini game, but they have to again lose value because they have to block. um and even if you don't have that no blue hand, you can always use 4 resources sometime. Like sometimes you use spoils into uh a Blade Runner if you have an extra, right? And so you use those 2 go against sources that generally cost 1, but now you use 4 resources, and that vigor kind of helped with that turn cycle. So it's a lot of investing in your future with that vigor, and so it's a cool kind of mini game.
So when you're playing Kassai, do you find that your blocking decisions are often determined by whether or not you made vigor tokens, whether your tunic counter's coming up, so that you can decide like, hey, I have 2 1 costs that I want to play in this hand, but I can't because I don't have a resource, or oh, I have that vigor token, so I'm able to keep this hand that has a blade flurry or a blade runner and a stroke of foresight in it together, and I don't have to block with these.
Yeah, I mean, you don't play tunic in most matchups. It's always blood spill. But most of the time there's kind of 2 big things that influence your blocking decisions. Most of the time and that's why in Warrior a lot of your cards kind of are centered around 3 value. So like 3 value defensively or 3 value offensively. And so a lot of that decision, okay, do I block with or use that card? Obviously there's that resource component. I mean, can I play my hand, right? But on the flip side, you get to, if you block with a yellow, you get to feed graveyard a little bit for your Kassai ability. And sometimes you don't need to feed your graveyard and you want to use your yellow offensively. But it kind of depends in general. Uh, but a lot of those decisions end up being very matchup to matchup, depending on the macro you've decided for that matchup. And one of the things I really enjoy about Kassai is that the macro over the game is very flexible. Like oftentimes you start the game and you have a very specific plan, and then oh wow, like that didn't really go as you wanted, and or like those kinds of hands forced you in those different play lines and you have to readjust. And I think like that's a very warrior like warrior as a flexible macro in general, and you kind of adapt it also to how the opponent plays, how they block you, etc. And that's a very enjoyable mini game.
Yeah, you got to feel the flow. It's like you're swinging a sword. Very flavorful.
Exactly.
Uh, all right, next we got Outland Skirmish. This is a pretty straightforward card. It sharpens steel, but it threatens a copper. Copper is very good in Kassai, as we'll talk about in a little bit when we get to a very specific card. But I assume this deck or this card probably fills that copper generation quota, since I don't think there is a lot of good copper generation in the game, but this being just a good rate card anyways, I mean, Sharpened Steel is not bad,
Yeah.
regardless. So one that has the upside that you're looking for is just solid. You're going to play this.
So some people they play the yellow version of Outland Skirmish to have a little bit more copper generation. I have some issues with that. The first one being that I am okay playing the yellow go again cards because I associate my Valiant Dynamo value with the go again card. So I always tell myself, okay, Blade Runner Red is actually giving me 4 value, and so I'm okay paying 1 for it. Same with Blade Runner Yellow, right? It's technically giving +2, but then you're getting the Go Again, which is going to give you Valiant Dynamo. So Valiant Dynamo values, you have to give +1 to that. I'm not okay playing yellows that are off what I would want as red. So stuff like Slice and Dice still gives you 3 value, and it's a yellow. So I'm okay with that. I don't want. It's a heuristic of mine to not play yellows that are underrated offensively and than defensively. At least in Kassai. And so I want all my yellows to still provide threats. And I mean, we're gonna talk about it, but Blood on Our Hands is the other thing that you constantly threaten throughout the game with copper generation. You as a Kassai player, and also obviously playing against Kassai, you always have to think 1 copper, 2 value. Like it's always like this. You can do the math. Blood on Our Hands gives you 2 value per copper, and so you Outland Skirmish, sure, it can be good as on yellow if it hits. The issue is that I don't want to trade off my face-up value for implied value on all my cards, right? And so Outland Skirmish is a 0 for 3. I'm okay playing a 0 for 3 in this deck, and it blocks 3. And okay, cool. Like there's upside, right? It kind of leans that copper stack that I'm mostly making off my spoils of war.
Yeah, implied value is great, but it's even better when it gets to be stapled onto a card that just has good value in general.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
It's a good face up value.
sure.
That's interesting.
So you already mentioned Slice and Dice, as opposed to Outland Skirmish. This one has an extra point of value with the condition that it has to be spread upon 2 sword swings, with most of the value being backloaded. Do you find that playing 6 copies of this card, you are ever kind of struggling with it, maybe in hands that lack Go Again?
Uh, Not really, because in general, if your hand is lacking Go Again, then you've seen more Go Again in the past. And so whenever I see hands that have multiple Go Agains in them, non-blue Go Again, obviously, um, I always hedge towards my future hands not being super high on Go Again. Like the ratios are quite nice in that normally you should have always slightly more than 1 or a little, not 2, but slightly more than 1, between 1 and 2 Go Again per hand. So if you're seeing a lot of Go Again, like I make sure to arsenal 1 and a good one generally, um, to be able to play out those future turn never brick. So in general, like the more you play with Kassai, the less greedy you become, and the less you're gonna arsenal Slice and Dice, the more you're gonna arsenal Go Agains. And Slice and Dice is just a 0 for 3 or a 0 for 4. It's quite good. Like yellow Slice and Dice, I think in my stats, like back in before LA, it was almost 50-50, like whether I blocked with it or played it depending on the matchup. And so it's just a very flexible card that I enjoy it. And Slice and Dice Red, we discussed, it's kind of Blade Flurry, but not in reaction. So yes, you do lose value on the fact it's not a reaction, but it's still awkward to block. And Slice and Dice Red actually is an interesting one because the plus, it's a weird thing, but because you're playing Hot Streak and Saber, you get to you attack with Saber first because your Saber is going for 3, threatening 4, and then Hot Streak is going to be 5, right? If it was the opposite, then your Hot Streak will be going for 3. It can't be buffed by itself, and then your Saber is going for 5, can be buffed to 6, but that's not a breakpoint, right?
Right. So the Saber Hot Streak ordering kind of depends on what cards you have to go along with it. You want to
Yeah,
try and get breakpoints as much as possible.
yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. Also, if you have Go Again anyways that for sure you're going to be playing, the Go Again text on Hot Streak, doesn't matter as much, and then you're more than able to attack with the Centauri Saber first if it makes sense to do that to threaten that breakpoint.
Yeah.
All right, Spoils of War, classic card from Crucible. Is this card good outside of the copper text?
I mean, outside of the copper text, I mean, again, like when I discussed go against, you have to kind of add a value to it, if not more, because the dynamo can be more than one value.
Mm.
If they block breakpoints. But I think it's a good card. Like obviously, like it's without the copper, it's +2 go again on red, whereas normally in your deck the +2 go again is yellow. So it's
Yeah.
slightly below. But if you count in the value of Valiant Dynamo, then like okay, cool. Like technically, it works on the red scale. Like it's fine. But I mean, you don't play this card. I mean, obviously, it's very good to have the go again, but this card is really like a package with blood on our hands. Like, it's one of your power cards. It's one of those threats that you kind of, you want to stagger threats. Every turn is kind of a new threat, or hopefully should be. And so you Spoils of War is just another threat that's not gold, because you have two kind of win cards. You have spoils with blood on your hands. So ideally the play pattern is you accumulate copper over time, over the game, and then maybe you pitch stack the blood on your hands, or you draw it at the end of the game. Oh, cool! Like I just get like a super juiced like 12 value card. The other play pattern is with Raise an Army, so you get to advance both of these win conditions, kind of in parallel, and different win conditions work well against different heroes. Like into Ninja, Blood on Your Hands was always better than Raise, obviously, because you didn't get as much value from your Centauri Sellsword from Raise an Army. So Blood on Your Hands and Raise an Army are both very, very strong win conditions.
Yeah, obviously copper is very important. The reason why I asked that question like that kind of goes into the next card. Historically, Warrior has always played Spoils of War just because the options for strong go again effects like this that aren't conditional were always kind of limited. But in the most recent set, we just got a new card that has go again. It's free. It gives Swords go again in this deck specifically pretty unconditionally. So we're kind of spoiled for choice now. We're getting more and more good Warrior go agains. So let's talk a little bit about Unsheathed. And is this card like Blade Flurry? Did you read this card and 5 seconds later realize, yep, that's good. That's what we needed?
Yeah, it's very good. Obviously, it's a go against worse that is above rate like significantly. It's 0 cost, and so I kind of explained it a little bit in a few minutes ago. But Unsheathed being 0 cost, and then you pitch a blue every turn, so you always get to start that Vigor train, that Vigor minigame, to lead out your future turn cycles. That's extremely important. So it's a 0 for 9 in Kassai, because you attack for 5, then 2, and then Valiant Dynamo recycles, and you get to make a Vigor, which is generally seen as 1 value. So it like in broad strokes is a 0 for it's like a 1 card, like it's 2 card 9 basically. That's really good. It like now it does have counterplay. Like if you read the text, it doesn't just say okay, like you have go again. It says if your attack is greater than twice its base, which like your sword are 2 base, so this giving +3 will make it have go again by default. However, like Frailty token is one of the big ones that can kind of neuter this card. Like Azalea like can give you Frailty, Assassin can give you Frailty. Those two classes now have a little bit more counterplay towards you and that power turn. But in general, you're quite favored into Assassin, and Azalea is a different beast. But I mean, I think Unsheathed has actually kind of low counterplay compared to different conditional cards, but it's not guaranteed go again, right?
Sure,
So
yeah.
there's a little bit of a price to pay for running it.
Yeah, you'd need another source of damage pump if you had a Frailty token already, which could brick this card if you don't have that, especially if you have something like a Blade Runner that doesn't give an increase on your first weapon attack.
Yeah,
you could get a blinding beam by a Bolton, and just ruin your day.
Well, to be fair, it says when this attacks, right? So it has to be a pre-pump, which
Oh,
that's the
okay.
problem
Okay.
it's the problem with Kassai. You don't actually run that many pre-pumps. Like you run some, but like most of your things are reactions, and so
Gotcha.
you
Gotcha.
kind of need to, yeah,
I
yeah. So
didn't.
that's why it's
I
a
didn't even
little
read it
bit,
that way.
yeah, yeah. Most people I discussed with thought it was just like on resolution it gets go again if it, but no, it's not resolution. It's on attack.
But overall, very solid card, obviously.
Oh, for sure. For sure, no, it's
Yep.
very good. It's your second best go again in in the list, outside of obviously your copper generator insane spoils.
Yeah, for sure. All right. We got the specialization. Blood on her hands. There's a lot of text on this card. You said something earlier about copper having 2 value. I thought pennies only had 1 value, but what explain this card to me as someone who's just picked up their sword, wet behind the ears.
Yeah.
How do you use this
So
card?
like the play pattern with this card is that it ends up being 4 sword attacks. So you have the +1 uh, while attacking for a target weapon. You have the target weapon as go again this turn, and then your target weapon may attack twice. And so you kind of see the play pattern of this card being, okay, if you have 6 copper, which is like kind of the maximum, you can choose each mode twice. And so each mode costs 1, so 2 times 3 is obviously 6. So you get to pick all of them. Generally, you do +1/+1 on your saber. So now your saber's for 4 and your hot streak's for 2. And then you give go again and attack twice on both your weapons. So you end up going 4/4/2/2, which is 12 value. Um, which that's when you have 6 copper, each copper was worth 2 value because of this card. The important thing though is that this does not reduce the cost of swinging your weapon. And so generally what you want to end up doing is drawing also with this card. So you end up drawing and then playing this card, and then now everything's free. You even have 1 floating if you want to do a little bit of juice with like reactions and things like that. But there this card can be played first cycle or second cycle. Most of the time in the heavy meta I played it second cycle because it kind of allowed you to in most matchups. um and you get to actually just have like legitimately a 1 card 12, like pitch a blue, your next card is a blood on her hands, and so now you play the blood on her hands, and now you have literally a 1 card 12, you just win the game. That happens. um but most of the time you kind of have to set it up if you want to do that, or keep an arsenal, things like that. Generally if you see a blood on her hands, and that's why there's 3, blood on her hands is always going to be the card that you block with if you don't have any copper, right? It's a yellow that has to synergize with copper. And so, okay, look, you draw 1 in your hand and you have 2 copper. Like it is not worth it. It is not worth it. So just block it with it. Feed your graveyard with the yellow. Be happy. You have 3 of those cards for a reason. Generally, only 1 activation just wins you the game. So you know the arsenaling it very early can lose you games because you need that consistency of go again, etc. But there's a chart. I think someone on Purple Discord made it, but it is for double Centauri Saber for what it's worth that they made this. But there's a chart of like how many copper, based on how many copper you have, what modes you choose. But generally, it all converges to being each uh, copper is worth at least 2 value. So like it's even a cool mini game for the audience watching this to do. Like just try to find like what the best value is. But there's a chart that maybe I can send you, and like maybe it can be edited in or something. I don't know, or linked. I don't know what content creators do, but there's some cool resources, or it's also a fun mini game for you to do.
Okay. So do you find that you are activating Blood on Your Hands without the maximum amount of copper frequently, or is it something that you really want to try and get every mode possible?
Uh, no. So
And I guess what
you
is the
don't
minimum amount of copper that you would say it's worth casting?
generally that pivot is 4, I think, is from my testing. Obviously, I haven't like grinded Kassai in like a few weeks, but I think it was always 4. You get to play go again, swing twice, go again, twice. Hot streak actually allows you to do weird things because sometimes you would play hot streak and see if they would block it, and then oh wow, it has go again now. Okay, cool. I'll play blood on her hands, and now I can do go again, swing twice on the Centauri, and then swing twice again on the hot streak, and now you have an extra mode +1. You don't need to give your hot streak go again, and so now you got like 2 value by putting +1 on Centauri. And so there's these kind of cool little tricks. There's also, generally most of the time you're not gonna just one card draw into gold, draw blood on your hands, just win the game. Most of the time you're gonna have like maybe another card in hand, or like you have the blue and blood on your hands in hand, and you pitch the blue to gold. So oftentimes you're gonna draw into a go again, and so that one cost at the end, uh, uh that go again, can relieve you of a mode, right? And so you just kind of have to do the math, and like it's the play pattern and logistics. You have to always think, okay, like what gets me the most value and what is the most annoying to block. So a lot of people, they'll do +1 on each sword, right? If they have 6 copper, you get to do all modes. They'll do sword for 3, sword for 3, but that is very easy to block, right? Because the ideal thing is to put the 2+1s on the Centauri Saber, and so now your Centauri is for 4, and then you have your hot streak going for 2 and 2, and that's way harder to block, right? It's just those little things that you have to learn over time. Like a whole video can really be made about this one card.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's definitely one of the reasons why you would want to play Kassai. It's a lot of
Yeah,
fun.
that and Raise an Army are the other reasons, really.
Speaking of the other card that says Kassai specialization on it, Raise an Army. So you mentioned before you're kind of cosplaying as an illusionist like this. Board state is a very powerful thing that you
Yep.
can do in Flesh and Blood. This is a way for a class that normally doesn't interact with that sphere of Flesh and Blood to do so. The card itself has a pretty heavy condition. Gold is generally pretty tough to make. In your case, it costs you quite a few cards that you have to banish from your graveyard, which you have to get there throughout the game. You also have to hit with your sword. And because of the value of gold, your opponent is going to be very aggressive in their prevention for you. They want to deny you to get that gold. So they're going to think, oh, you activated Kassai. This is the turn I need to block. So unless your opponent is just going full send it, I don't care, I'm not blocking anything, I'm just going to race you, you can have 20 gold if you want. How hard is it to fuel this card? And is this something that you are playing towards in most matchups? And how many cell swords are you trying to make generally?
Yeah. Um. Let's see. In general, you play this card into mid-range or control matchups. Um, you don't play this into aggro. It's too slow. Um, this is kind of the central reason of why I think Kasa is an implied value hero and that gains value over your bad blocks. Is that you, as the opponent, are given this value proposition of, do I block this gold on hit or not? If you do decide to block it, I am a warrior, I'm gonna have reactions. So a lot of the time, like, unless I'm in very dire situations, sometimes you will have to give activate Kassai to get to for the gold, and then just do 2 into go again into 4 or into 5, and because you need that little bit of tempo gain. But most of the time, what you're gonna end up doing is you want the opponent to block you and then go on top and make sure you still have that gold. So obviously classes that kind of have built-in D reacts are a lot stronger against that. So you have to often, stack your reactions. Sometimes you go to you go to third cycle because you set up your attack reaction cards like very well in your second cycle, and then that's when you make the gold. And then on your third cycle is when you make the little Centauri sellsword and from the gold you made second cycle. Sometimes it's just you make the golds as you go. It is mid-range matchup. They still need to send you threats, so they can't block you as great, and you still make the gold with your reacts. So you still have like everything first cycle, very easy peasy. But at the end of the day, the you as the Kassai player should think about two things: is can I go over if they block me, and do I want them to block me? Most of the time, you want them to block you and make errors. Um, so you almost never activate Kassai when you have just two cards and you can't represent any threats. Like if your hand's completely empty, your arsenal's completely empty, and they know you have your go again in hand, right? And just to go again, it's the freest block ever, and they don't lose any value. It's when they have to hedge against reactions or two reactions that and the type of reaction, like we discussed with, is it the 0 for 3 reaction, or is it the is it just a second Blade Runner? Sometimes that happens, or is it like a Blade Flurry? Like these are the kind of questions that you're asking for your opponent, and you need to make them misplay or play into their misplay, etc. So you have to be patient. You don't just activate Kassai every turn. Like that is the best way to just a lot of decks, and they have very minimal blue, and they have half red, half yellow, and they just like try to play two or block with two reds, two yellow every turn, so they activate Kassai every turn. Like that is not the way you play this deck. Like that's very easy to read, and the opponent, if the opponent is like half good, they know how to block it, and you're completely doomed. You need to ask questions of your opponent and make them make difficult decisions. And so obviously the game gets harder the more skilled your opponent is and how much they know to play into Kassai. But at the end of the day, you should always think that you're the threat, and you should never play around what your opponent does. You need to make them play around you, right?
What is the most amount of swordsmen that you can remember making in a game?
Oh yeah, I had a game. I mean, obviously in testing, like there's some completely degen things, like
Sure.
outside of tournaments. But in official tournament play, it was at PTLA. I was playing Kassai. They were playing Dory with the Great Axe, so the kind of fatigue Dory. I think it was in the calling day 2, and I end up we have a very good game going on. We have both have very good turn cycles, and are clearly pitching and counter pitching each other. And then I have a Raisin army set up second cycle, and I see another Raisin army like that I get to pitch stack on the next turn after that. So my whole plan is to keep my life up and like take damage to then play the double raise. I think I make 4 on the first one, and then obviously they kill 1 on the next turn, and the turn after that I make another gold because they need to kill another of the Centauri sellsword, and then I make 2 more or 3 more or something like that. So like I staggered some gold. So I think on board at the same time I think I had like 5, if I remember correctly. Like it was just completely crazy. It was absurd, like completely won.
Did you win that game, I assume?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It seems tough for Axe Dory to deal with.
Yeah, you have 5 cell swords. 1 cell sword is 1 resource is 3 damage. Like your blues converted to 9 damage, you just like completely destroyed them. Yeah. So, notably though, they do have a condition that you need to have attacked with a weapon this turn. So you still need to go again for what it's worth.
You can't just pitch your blue and swordsman.
Yeah, that'd be so broken. That'd be so broken. But
that's why you have all the blue go agains, right? For your late
exactly.
game, when you're in the fatigue
Exactly.
state and you resolved your Centauri sellswords, you need ways to do it, even though the rate at that point doesn't matter. You just need to be able to turn them on.
I mean, your rate should be up. How your bad go again rate should be compensated by the fact that you have literally like 3 dudes helping you fight.
Also, hopefully, like that late in the game, your opponent's at a desperate state where they have to block that kind of stuff anyways because they're about to die.
Exactly. I will say though, mid game raise, on 2 gold, like it's always. It's very dependent on the matchup, whether you want 2, 3, sometimes just 1 Centauri sellsword. It depends how easily the opponent can kill them. Like if they can swing, or if they can kill 2 in the 1 turn, it's not great. Like easily, right? If they can kill 2. But if they can only kill 1 most turns, then like it might be worth it. Right? So sometimes it depends. It's a very flexible game plan. Sometimes I've resolved Raise an Army on turn like 4 and like still like I won the game just from that like 1 or 2 dudes worth of tempo. So it depends. This list is running only 2 Raise, and that's because it's mainly a pitch stack card. In the other types of matchups where Raise is not your main win condition, like Ninja, Mech, etc. This it's just a block 3 yellow, and so you don't want too many of them still. And 2 is fine. It's a pitch stack card, so you don't need to have like 3 of them to be super efficient with that card. And 3 is fine. It just doesn't. It's just like for efficiency's sake.
It can be a little bricky in those cases in which you don't have the gold or it's too early and you see it and it's just a yellow block 3 that doesn't do anything.
Yeah, and it can be bricky. And actually, the number of yellows I believe in this deck is 15, and that's because I want 14 outside of 1 raise, just from like being able to threaten Kassai 7 times. In the sideboard, I think in this list that I sent you, I don't have yellows. Yeah, I don't have yellows. But in the past, you would have like maybe that's all you got, 2 of them, to like kind of give you 1 more.
That card when you know you're not going to be needing it.
No, not necessarily. Not to replace, but actually to have
to it.
one more Kassai activations worth of yellows. And it's a 0 for 3 defense reaction, so it's slightly an on rate. Defense reaction maybe a little bit above rate, but it's.
You could play the good old springboard somersault.
Yeah. I do miss that card. That card was crazy. It was a little slow. In Hartford, I played 2 somersaults. It's yellow for people who don't know. It's a yellow 0 cost D-React that says if it was from Arsenal, blocks 4. But if it's not blocking from Arsenal, it's blocking 2. So But that was just such an above rate play when it worked. Like it was giga addictive, and I think I cut that card like maybe a week or 10 days before I was about to leave for LA. So maybe 2 weeks before LA, and it was a good decision at the end of the day. But that card's a little slow, but it's funny
for sure. All right, we got one run through. Not much to say about this. Just more copies of
just yellow Blade Runner.
Yep. Yeah, like we already talked about that. All right, you got 1 Shift the Tide of Battle. Yeah. What does this card do, and why are you only playing 1 of it?
Yeah, so it's just like a 0 cost go again, and currently you actually have a lot of go again, which is like cool and fun. It's a yellow, so you have a little bit of like decisioning to make, and oftentimes your yellow base is going to be quite meta dependent. So obviously you're gonna have blood on your hands and Raise an Army, but the rest is meta dependent. Like maybe you need flexible yellow cards, or you need defensive cards, etc. This one is cool because it gives your card go again if its attack is greater. Oftentimes, like when you have that card, you'll play Centauri first. or you know, sometimes you still go hot streak if you have a pump. But it's also good to roll over an extra go again next turn. Like that card can be worth 2 go agains, and in very grindy situations where you have maybe you're like trading 2 card hands, and your opponent's like blocking each one of your swing. Um, like if you go Centauri first, and then they block, and you shift, and then you have another sword, it can be worth 2 go agains, which can completely win you the game. So I find that card to be a little bit high rolly. I like having that little bit of high roll aspect to the list, even though that's not really what Warrior does. It's just a fun card that I've been kind of trying here and there. I've never registered that card like in a official tournament, but I think that you could have a spot, and it's quite fun. Um, Probably that card can kind of change. It's just like a fun flex slot.
Agility tokens can be very powerful. Speaking of
Yep.
agility tokens, one card that you've excluded from this deck list is
Yeah.
Take It on the Chin. This is usually very common in these warrior decks as a way to, create the agility token, making your next turn smoother. So why have you opted to not play this one?
Yeah. Take on the chin has always been a favorite of mine. I think I registered it in Hartford and LA. The issue with that card is that it can kind of break on itself. Like if you draw 2 in a hand, and now you kind of like in weird spots. It also needs to prevent damage. So if your opponent kind of lets you be like, it doesn't attack into you, now you take on the chin is worth like nothing. It can kind of rot away in your arsenal if they kind of let you do your thing and block like Guardian could sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean it's good. Like the card is very good. It gives you 2 card 7 2 1 7, yeah, which is good. Like it's good, but it's red. It kind of does weird things. Like sometimes you really just wish it was a 3 block and like be done with, So it's just a little out of place, I think, for the current meta. Like where you have to rely on blocking break points often, um, and 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 kind of less. It's less, I think, about value and more so about like your macro and making sure you don't have off rate uh, defenses. Like I think currently the meta looks like. So I think it's a little bit out
Yeah.
of place currently.
Okay. We'll quickly go over the blue cards. These cards don't turn on your hero power, so they're not cool. But, I guess you got to play them to pay for stuff. But
Yeah,
we
always
got
sucks.
Glint the Quicksilver, Warrior Staple, 0 cost go again at blue.
Yeah,
Sometimes pays for
just
itself.
very good.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just a free go again.
Does
Just very good.
does the draw effect reducing the cost of your next sword attack ever come into play big?
Oh yeah, yeah. Like sometimes it's the same concept. You pitch a blue attack, they block. Okay, cool, glint, and now I get a free card for next turn, and I get to pay for vigor, and like I get to attack with my second sword. Or if they block, if they block, then um, and I don't get to pay for vigor, like that's fine too. Like sometimes they also block your second swing, and so you can't have the vigor. It's whatever. But just the fact that it's essentially a 1 card 4 with split damage, with sometimes an extra vigor, right? Because it replaces itself. So it's good. It's good. The
It's
card's
good.
good.
It's solid. It's all star.
It's solid.
Yep. Yeah, we got this gross 2-block. Why you want a 2-block in your deck?
I know. It's a little cringe. I don't love 2 blocks. I'm just testing Goblet right now. It feels fine. It's a staple in Hatchet's Dory. One of the biggest reasons you would play this card is because it lets you stack value on your next turn. So the vigor kind of mini game starts with this card because you get to and it's kind of strange because the vigor and the agility kind of counteract each other, because you would normally pay the one for your uh, for your go again card, and then make a vigor and whatever. But it's just like above rate for a blue, and like yeah, it blocks 2, but in this day and age, reading is banned, so I don't even know what that number is.
There's only 2 in the deck, anyways, right?
Yeah,
Surely
there's only
Warrior's
2.
got to have some 2 blocks. You know your deck's bad if you just play 63 blocks. It means you don't have any power cards.
Exactly. Your power
Yeah.
cards are your 2 blocks, right?
Yeah, that's how it works.
Yeah.
Hit and run. I mean, it's blue go again. Rate wise, this card's not that good, but I assume it's just what
It's go again.
option you have. Yeah, you need it in those
You
late game scenarios.
like we discussed earlier, it's just late game go again, just very good.
You got one of overpower. You're trying to cheese some people. They think that in the end of the game,
Yeah.
they can block
There's
exactly.
there's some like suggestions. Like actually right now the 2 goblets are kind of in the 2 overpower slots. Like I mean, there's some flexibility you can always have with like those blues, but I really like overpower. I'm looking into right now if like 1 overpower is enough, like to just make people, you know, play around it and respect it. But maybe 1 is too little. We'll see. At the end of the day, that card's is very good when they allow you. It's a +4 blue in the late game. Most of the people, they won't have a sync or a fate, and you just win the game. So it has cheese potential, which we like that. And then yeah, it's cool. Turn 1 also, you can do kind of weird thing like okay, league 4, turn 1, very cool.
Do you prefer overpower over, I think, fatal engagement? I believe it is the 2-cost one.
Oh yeah. The weird
one.
thing. So I was playing this in LA meta. The weird thing with fatal engagement is that it has to be blocked with an attack action, or you can't play at all. Overpower is like it gives +2 and then +4 um if you they block. So it's always playable at least. Fatal engagement can kind of put you in a situation where you're arsenaling it and then you never get it out of your arsenal ever.
Yeah.
So it's a little awkward. It depends on how much attack action blocking is going to happen in this meta. That's also one of the indicators of whether Kassai is going to be good or not. But most of the time, it's not as good. I just prefer overpower.
All right, you have a couple of Steelblade Shunts built into the mana base of your deck, but you play Grains into most matchups. So what purpose is this card serving, and why are you okay with playing it when you don't have the optimal chess piece to go along with it?
Yeah, I needed space to have Enigma tools. I think the blue shunts are like one of the better rates. Also, at the end of the day, like you can, as a warrior, you always have that cheese potential late game of they go out 1 and you steal late shunt. Like that's always something that if your opponent sees you pitch a steel blade shunt, like they have to be aware of.
It's like Reckless Swing. It's like
it's reckless swing.
They're just
exactly.
not allowed to go to 1.
Exactly,
Yeah.
or to 2 really, like for
Sure.
reckless swing's purpose. You also have 2 steel blade shunts, so like actually if you're at 2, you're also in danger, right? It's just part of the Enigma toolbox that kind of needed to put in the main board. But you have kind of low cost opportunity. Most heroes will respect this late game, and like you end up pitching a lot of your blues, anyways. It kind of makes you take weird turns where like you don't want to pay to play it, so you block with the go again blue, and so now like your second cycle slightly weaker. But I'm testing it. I do think you need the shunts for against Enigma. So whether they're blue, whether they're red, like I think you need at least 5, if not 6. So even now, like some lists are running 3 shunts. That's feels a little much, but we'll see.
Okay. And then lastly, you have Warmonger's Diplomacy, another strong meta counter card. However, your deck plays a decent amount of non-attack actions. So how do you make this card work in your list and not screw yourself over? Is it just that powerful that you really needed
Uh,
to shut down Rune Blades?
I mean, Runeblade's is just a thing now. Like,
Yeah.
I think everybody's gonna play Warmongers. Like, there's no two ways about it. Most of the time, though, like your turns are very functional. Just off weapon attack, give go again, weapon attack. Um, Oftentimes, like Blade Runner's your arsenal or like a go again reaction. So you, at the very, very, very least, your turn is gonna be 7-8 value, right? And like, okay, maybe you don't play all the cards in your hand, but like your opponent just had like a 3 value turn cycle. Like you feel okay about that.
I mean, at the very
Uh,
least, like you could just have the only go again be like a spill blood or something, right?
yeah.
Or
You also
spoils the day.
have yeah. You also have the cool thing about Kassai is that she kind of has an out to those extra cards. Like, oftentimes the Rune Blade will not block after being Warmongered because they want to, or block me very minimally because they need to regain tempo. And so, you oftentimes what ends up happening is your two weapons end up hitting after Warmongers, and so you can convert extra cards in hand to Vigor tokens. And so it obviously that's insane, right? Um, I've and two Vigor tokens notably pitches for what? For your gold. And your gold draws, it makes your things like two Vigor tokens is almost always insane. Because you can have two Vigor tokens draw in your arsenal. You have a Blade Runner, so you have weapon, pitch a card you drew to Blade Runner, and then weapon. So you literally had like a one card 8 or 7 using your gold. So yeah, it's just like you end up having cool plays off Warmongers, and it's just a good card.
And like you said, it's going to be pretty relevant for a lot of the heroes. Runeblade is
Yeah,
seemingly, having a comeback to some degree. Azalea's still around. It's pretty solid into her. And it
yeah.
blocks 3. You don't have to put more nasty 2 blocks in your deck.
Yeah, that there's a limit of 2 here. We don't do more.
Yeah, yeah. Or else why are we playing Warrior, right?
Exactly. You want everything to be 3 go agains,
Yes.
defensively or offensively.
So looking at the sideboard, configuration you have, I notice a package of pretty defensive cards. So
Yeah.
is this just indicative of how Kassai is meant to be played overall with her mid-range style, that you just need these heavily blocking cards and to play into your, strategies?
Yeah. Um, I think Kassai has always been and will always be a mid-range hero. Obviously, like 0 for 4 D reacts are like super great in mid-range heroes, whether it's Fate or Sync, just way above rate. So you play those. Um, you don't need to like go overboard with them. Like there's not. That's to be determined. Like this list is very early in the meta, but this is not the LA meta where like you really had to grind out max value over like a 50-minute game. This is a meta that's slightly less value oriented, although the games are still quite long. So I think you can do without like 3 and 3, like 3 phase, 3 sync. But to be determined. That's definitely something that can always change. Um, then the Oasis, the main purpose of this is Wizard, um, specifically um, Kino. Kino historically has been a horrible matchup for Kassai. Like it's just there's no two ways about it. I've never won like an official game like outside of testing into Kano, but or maybe one, but it's just not. It wasn't good. But now that tomes are banned, very like it's much better actually,
Right.
and you get to tempo a lot harder into them, and you only need to see one Oasis and you block their turn because they can't pitch stack into you anymore. They basically have to see Wildfire off the top. Because even though you're mid-range hero, you can kind of turn on the spice and still threaten good damage into him. So now he has to see Wildfire quite fast, and if you see Oasis, you just win the game. The reason I have AB1 is kind of like I'm not sure how much AB is needed. Probably now you can get even 3, and like you could potentially even fatigue Kano. Like I think that's kind of that would be funny. I'm not even sure if that's possible, but we'll see. Into Osilio, I have not tested that matchup. I assume you might need AB3 in that. And then Verdance, AB1 might be fine, to be honest.
In a theoretical meta where Kassai's best interest is to be the aggressor in most matchups, are there cards that you could bring in instead of these defensive packages to kind of amp up your offense against decks who are better inevitably than you? Especially now with cash-in being banned, I don't know if there are any options that you aren't already playing that are just really good for killing people faster.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of cards that, they're good into heroes that won't block you. Things like Outland Skirmish Yellow, we talked about having a bad rate, but the copper, if they don't block the copper, then the rate's fine. It's a yellow 0 for 4 essentially, when converted uh by your
Blood.
copper, yeah, your blood. So there's those types of cards that like amp up your play patterns that like make them also slightly more threatening for them to your opponents to block. But at the end of the day, like playing the value game is even finding to very aggressive heroes, because like back when Katsu was a thing, I had a very good Katsu matchup, and you just block a lot. Whenever they leave you openings, you make a gold or you make a few coppers, and then you accumulate that over very long games. You slow them down as much as possible, and then even if you're on 1 or 2 tokens, or you just cash in that card, well, cash in, not the card, but you know what I mean,
The
and
metaphorical
you
cash in.
yeah yeah yeah, a metaphorical cash in, uh
Rest in peace.
the copper or the gold, and yeah, you can win games. So it's a lot of accumulation of the game, and macro goes a lot in how much you want to threaten and how much token you actually want, and that will determine how conservatively you will threaten on hits and things like this. But at the end of the day, like if your on hits are going through, you're one of the highest rate heroes in the game, so it's quite strong.
Makes sense. Makes sense. All right. Well, Pierre, you talked about Kassai a while.
Yeah.
Myself, as a new and budding warrior player who just picked up my swords, after listening to you talk for a while, I realized that I hate Kassai, and I think she's awful, and I don't want to play her anymore. So, as someone who is new to the game and hates Kassai and doesn't want to lose to her, what should I do to play against Kassai? How can I improve my skill set and understanding to best counteract her?
Yeah. A lot of that goes into reps, just knowing her play patterns, what kind of reaction she has. Like even if you hate Kassai and you really really want her to like burn in the fire or something, then like actually I would say play her and see what she ends up doing. Play her for a few games and see how she plays. Oftentimes, like into warrior, it's always the same deal. It's how much you're respected and how much reactions you have. If you have like 3 fates, 3 sinks, 3 unmovables, whatever, like the game becomes way harder for the warrior, like significantly harder. So if you have ways to cover breakpoints, like armor, D-reacts, um, it's and ways to kind of get around evasion with the reactions, with attack reactions, you have play into Kassai. Now, also there's the psychological aspect of a good Kassai player will try to read your play and then make sure understand how you end up playing and your play patterns, and kind of try to play against your play patterns, your psychologically. So you kind of not being aware of whether you can be read or not. Um, and like Josh Lau says it a lot uh, on his streams, like when he plays warrior, like you just look at how he thinks and kind of see if he could think that of you, if he could read you in that situation. Oftentimes it's just varying play pattern, how you block, all that. Once you're aware of it, you block differently to warrior. So it's reps and understanding of the game and fundamentals. There's a good like proverb that I was told when I started the game. It's like once you can start beating and Dory like consistently, you're good at the game
Dory's
because
the
you understand
benchmark, yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
that
You're
makes
like,
sense.
yeah, Dory is the benchmark for whether you're like actually okay at the game. So I think Kassai is kind of in that range, although way harder. I think
Sure.
she's actually way harder to beat than Domblay Dory. But you get it's hero dependent, you know.
There's
You
more
could always run,
variations here and there.
yeah, you could
Yeah.
run cringe like fatigue Bravo with like super life gain and like turbo D reacts and completely destroy Kassai. Sure, like okay, I have fun, I guess. But like that's always possible
Yeah.
if your locals is annoying you.
So whether or not you're playing as Kassai or playing against Kassai, just understanding the hidden information that warriors,
Yeah,
tend to give you the best chance. Understanding the breakpoints. It is good, to play as other heroes, I think, and that's true for Dory and Assassin and Kassai. Understanding how to play the hero yourself and which breakpoints matter, what on hits matter, when they matter, especially with Kassai. Like, there might be a case when the copper or the gold is just a bait and they just want you to block, so they don't die.
yep,
And
exactly.
you being able to read that situation, understand like, hey, this is an important on hit, I need to try and stop it, or hey, this is not an important on hit, I just need to pressure them as fast as possible. Definitely gives you
Yeah,
the best way to succeed.
again, like I think this might be like the most spammed word in this video, but like implied value, like Kassai plays off implied value. Like you need to understand that. That means she doesn't always need the gold. Like you said, yeah, you just mentioned, like sometimes she just activates to try to gain back tempo and try to make you lose value by blocking weirdly. Like that is what she operates on. That is what you need to play against. You need to understand that. Some matchups she actually does want the gold. And she's probably always fine with having gold. But does gold actually matter that much into your matchup? Maybe not. So you have to understand like how what her game plan is into you, and so we can if you have questions you can ask me or whatever. But it's a very cool hero to play against because I think there's a lot of psychological play against and as her. So uh, definitely fun.
Yeah, it's always fun to play a hero that has that extra element to them. It's not always
Yeah,
just math based. I do my thing, you do your thing. Let's see whose thing's better. She seems like a lot of fun.
yeah, she's fun.
Yeah,
She's fun. I think you'll do well when you do your stream of all the
uh,
AtoZ thing.
I gotta pick up my swords eventually, right?
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right, well, Pierre, thank you very much. It was very informative. Is there anything
Oh,
you'd
you're
like to
welcome. It was
shout
awesome.
out while you're here?
Yeah, shout out to Team Sigil. Shamir kind of helped me like review the list a little bit. He also plays a bit of Kassai, and obviously shout out to the card guys for having me. I'm honored to do this A to Z on the content guys video. Uh, nah, but seriously, have a great day, everyone. I hope you enjoy Kassai, and always feel free to DM me on Twitter or and follow me, ask me questions. I assume they're gonna card guys are gonna link it here,
Yeah,
and yeah, I don't bite. I'll for sure help anybody. So
yeah.
thanks everyone.
Pierre's a nice guy, and thank you everyone for watching.
Allegedly.
Thank you everyone for watching. Hope you enjoyed. As always, I'd like to thank the sponsors of our video: Fabric.com, Dragon Shield for all your sleeves need, and Magnolia Gaming for all your cardboard needs. Links in the description. Thank you,
Dragon Shield Gamer.
Dragon Shield Gamer.